This is Will Nunziata, New York City-based director and creator of theater, television, and film. And today I am thrilled to be speaking with Lance VALLIS of Special Purpose, a band that blends psychedelic sounds with earthy elements of funk and jazz. You're not going to find another band out there quite like Special Purpose. But before I get to our interview, my interview with Mr. Lance, here is a sneak peek of the incredible talents of Special Purpose. How are you?
I'm good. Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. And Lance, thank you so much for allowing me to call you Mr. Lance. Of course, I know your last name is VALLIS, but I don't know. When I feel familiar with someone, I just add Mr. with the first name. I don't know. My husband yells at me all the time about it. So
I used to teach at a nursery school, and that's what they called me. So I kind of think back to that.
You have PTSD from it. I get it. Listen, I want to know first and foremost, Lance, you have such an amazing authentic group that you're a part of. I've never heard anything of the nature quite like what you guys create. Curious, how did Special Purpose come about for you?
That's a good question. So a friend of mine asked me if I was interested in putting a band together, and we met and found a couple of other musicians to play with. It had maybe one or two jams, and it didn't really go too far with these specific people. The person who invited me to do it said that he didn't have time. And so I had meanwhile kind of gotten a fire lit underneath me to do this. And so I thought, well, I'm going to do it anyway, even though he's apparently dropping out here. And so it was a process to find musicians and ask, people that I asked weren't available. Then I asked them for recommendations. And so it's kind of a combination of that, meeting people through the scene, through Craigslist posts. And at this point, I have an established core of musicians that are regular performers rather than a revolving door, which I did have for some amount of time, where it would sort of like a jazz gig where, okay, we need a new drummer. We can maybe tell them the material we're going to do and rehearse once, and it'll show up for the show and do the gig. But then even that might not be that same people, those same personnel from show to show. A lot of times it would be, but there was, like I said, kind of a revolving door with musicians, depending on who's available. And I think like a lot of jazz musicians, they play with their own groups. They also have other secondary groups they play with as sidemen. But now at this point, I definitely have an established core of musicians, which is great.
I love that. That's important. Look, I was a singer for 25 years, believe it or not. And yeah. I know what it's like to pick up musicians on the road. And sometimes, when they're not part of the team, it becomes another gig for a lot of these guys, and God bless, or gals. But the fact that you have that core collective is awesome. And I'm just curious to know, what is it about this psychedelic sound that you love so much? Was this something that you grew up listening to? My first question that I wanted to ask you for weeks now is, what was the musical landscape of Lance's bedroom as a kid?
A lot of Led Zeppelin. I loved Led Zeppelin. Being a guitar player, Stevie Ray Vaughan was up there. He was very popular in the 80s when I was growing up, late 1980s. Other groups, I'm trying to think, big influences. A lot of Led Zeppelin, I guess. As far as like other music that I like, all the classic rock stuff, classic rock radio, ranging from the Doors to the band Yes, the band Rush.
How does jazz get in there?
Another good question. My teacher was sort of a reformed rocker, I guess the way to put it, where he felt
a recovering rocker.
He felt that rock didn't quite have the sophistication that jazz did. I grew up on Long Island, and so he would kind of expose me to some of that stuff, and Charlie Parker and things like that. It wasn't really, jazz hasn't really been trendy, I guess you could say, for decades. Even when I was growing up, it was you know, it's funny because I saw somewhere somebody has a blog called "Calling Jazz the Music of Unemployment," and so there's, you know, it's just not so popular compared to rock and pop. And so I definitely got a taste of jazz from my high school guitar teacher, and it was always sort of there, but it's just not popular. You kind of have to seek it out. You're just not going to hear it. Maybe you'll hear it in a movie, but it doesn't get played on the radio. And over time, I think I was just interested in expanding my harmonic horizons and wanted to just get more into it. And I kind of learned to love it a little bit more, and ultimately wound up getting my master's degree in jazz studies about 6 years ago.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, when I think of jazz, I kind of look at it like if I were to compare to, you know, a lot of choreographers say for dancers, you should study ballet as a foundation. For me, as a singer for so many years, you know, to learn classically, but also to learn jazz is such an, I think, an important foundation for all musicians and artists. So that's amazing that you went and got your master's. I want to know though, Lance, I almost called you Mr. Lance again, but I don't want that PTSD from nursery school coming up. Talk to me a little bit about the impetus behind the song Loneliness Isn't So Bad, that the audience just took a little, had a little sneak listen to.
That's a good question. I guess, I mean, there's no lyrics. So I guess just judging from the vibe of the song, the chords and the melody, I try and align whatever that sentiment is. It's so abstract when there are no lyrics, so you try to tap into whatever that sentiment might be.
Well, you're a great storyteller. Sorry to interrupt, but you were such a great storyteller. As a director and listening to that song, for example, I could almost like feel the ebb and flow of the story without a lyric. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
that's nice to hear. It's, I guess I'm so close to it, sometimes it's hard for me to get that perspective on it. I guess it just occurred to me, and sometimes I just I have to think for a while for a song. I think for a song title, that is, and what I'm going to name instrumental song. Like I said, it's not always obvious without a chorus and actual lyrics. And in this case, I just sort of had the title from day one, more or less. And I think it was just the vibe of the melody and just how the chords and the melody fit together, the harmony and the melody fit together.
Amazing. Well, listen, Lance, before I ask my final question, I want to let everyone know, for more on Lance and Special Purpose, you can read more about him right below this video. Lance, if you could give advice to younger Lance, what would it be?
In terms of just anything at all with music?
Anything. Doesn't have to be about music, could be about life, could just be advice that you'd want to give him, even if it's what you're feeling today.
So many things. Well, one of the things I remember that I was seeking out some guidance in my career, so it's going back years and years. And something that has kind of stuck with me is with music, it's all about the hang and the people that you're with. And it gets complicated and muddled perhaps when you're trying to do something professionally and you're trying to earn money, and you might tend to think, well, I'm just going to get the best people, the best players, the best musicians. And of course that's important, but it's the special blend of good enough players. They don't have to be the best that you've ever heard in your life, but you get along well and they are committed and they'll show up they'll give it a certain amount of priority for rehearsals and for shows, and they'll travel away from home for however far, you try and be reasonable about that kind of thing. And I would say try to embrace that a little bit more rather than just going for the best players you can find.
I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, I could remember being on a road with some musicians, even some of the quote unquote best in Manhattan. And it was like, yes, they were great musicians, but my goodness, pre and post show, it's the whole vibe of the experience. If there's anything I learned off of that, it's like the business is too hard to not have a good time when you're finally able to do the thing.
Yeah. I remember talking with someone about my situation, even with Special Purpose, in fact, where some of the early players who had, one of the bass player, for example, lived in New York for years and years, 10 years maybe, and had reached a certain level. I think he had done some studio sessions. Apparently he co-wrote a song that's on a Blondie record. And he was one of these guys, to quote this other person who was giving me some advice and guidance, was if the guys who need a certain amount of money to leave the house and do your show, those guys just aren't going to work out ultimately. Right. And he was a great player, and it was great to play with him, and we got along great, but there needed to be sort of a guarantee, and that was always there. And on one hand, I kind of used it for motivation to, okay, well, let's get the better paying gigs and try and work to make that happen. But as somebody else put it, you just work so hard to make baby steps of progress, and it ultimately it gets in the way. And Correct. So you need to try to find people who you have to kind of succeed despite whatever low pay you're going to get for the show, and you have to try to. Ultimately, it's more rewarding to just have people who are committed and will show up, and they don't need to know, well, what does it pay, and then I'll make a decision. And so it's a little bit of kind of swallowing your pride, because, you know, like I said, getting my master's degree and whatnot, it's like, okay, I have all this training and, you know, student loan debts and whatnot. And I just want to try and get a handle on that. And then the gig doesn't pay so well. And then, you know, to deal with it on the musician side, the people who are playing with you, it can be a little bit overwhelming in terms of, okay, well, you want to get the best paying gig that you can, but ultimately, I think you just want to do the show, period. And the pay, you'll almost have to do it notwithstanding whatever the low pay might be. And then hopefully you do make progress. And we're finally getting there. We're getting some better shows and better venues and better paying gigs and whatnot. But it's taken some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, you don't need me to tell you to keep going. But again, I've never heard of any band like yours. And I've done hundreds of these interviews and have been in this business for a really long time. I love what you guys do. And also, I just love too, that what a beautiful opportunity people are going to get when we get to all return to live performance, you know, even more so than we have been, to listen to Special Purpose and just close your eyes and escape. You know what I mean?
Well, I appreciate that. It's a tough one, I think, with instrumental music. Vocal music will always be more popular.
Yeah, I'm going to agree to disagree with you, because okay. I mean, granted, I'm an old soul, but I think that people are more willing now than ever to lean into it. Maybe I'm, you know, holding our society to too high of a standard, but I just feel like things are going to change. I feel like people are now able, now more than ever, to kind of like zone out and not be so reliant on having to be entertained every millisecond. I don't know. I just with lyric and curse words and blah blah blah. I don't know. You guys have something incredibly, dare I say, special.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, obviously you can find your niche and your audience, and the internet helps a lot. And
of course,
modern distribution we have with the streaming services also.
Awesome. Well, Lance, listen, I'm so grateful that we're now connected, and so grateful for your time today. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.